So what I want to do in this video is have a look at the role that the monarchy plays within the system of the UK Constitution. We're going to have a look at the monarchy and the Royal Prerogative. Specifically, we're going to have a look at the following issues. So the idea of the monarch as head of state. We're going to have a look at what that means for the monarchy as a head of state of the United Kingdom. And then we're going to have a look at the implications of the monarch as head of state by looking at the various relations with the other branches of government. So when it comes to talking about the head of state, it must be stated that there are different kinds of head of state in the world. Okay, so executive heads of state actively exercise legal and political power over the other branches of government, and in the rest of the world, generally the head of state is usually elected. This is something that is an important point that really sets us out from other states in the world. Because in the UK, our head of state is an unelected hereditary monarch. So when we look at the idea of the monarchy as head of state, we have to look at the idea of the constitutional monarchy. So the UK exists as what we call a constitutional monarchy, whereby the monarch exercises legal powers in a parliamentary system. So the reigning monarch is the head of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. She is the Supreme Governor of the Church of England. She is Commander-in-Chief, and she's the head of state of realms and territories and defender of the state. So the constitutional role of the monarchy includes, if we ever look at the official legislation that is set out outlining the constitutional role of the monarchy, we find that in Section 3 of the Coronation Oath Act 1688, that implies that the monarch is head of state, and the monarch must cause law and justice in mercy to be executed in all judgments. Okay, so this implies that the monarch is also the head of the judiciary. This is what the Coronation Oath Act implies. And it also implies that the monarch's power is almost legally absolute, so almost having unlimited power. And why I've written that that makes sense in theory but not in practice is that the changing nature of the Constitution since the Coronation Oath Act has changed the role that the monarchy plays in society. So the vast majority of the roles carried out by the monarch are now carried out by the executive. And if we have a look now at the idea of the Privy Council, so the Privy Council is one of the oldest parts of government. All ministers who are appointed to participate in its policy must be elected MPs, which signifies the role that it plays in a constitutional monarchy. So they have to be democratically elected MPs. And we should note that the head of the Privy Council is called the President of the Privy Council. So going into a little bit more detail regarding the monarchy and their relationship with the executive, the monarch is seen as the head of the executive. Over the course of modern history, legal and constitutional distinctions have emerged between the person and the political capabilities and the capacities of monarch. And this is particularly true of the Bill of Rights. The monarch appoints the Prime Minister as well as all other ministers as Secretaries of State, and this is sometimes done directly or mainly done through the Royal Prerogative. She has the legal power to grant honours, to declare war and make peace, to conduct foreign affairs, to execute and administer the law, and according to Walter Bagehot in the English Constitution, he suggests that the rights of the sovereign are the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. When it comes to the second branch of government, we're going to have a look at the role of the monarchy with the legislature. The monarch's relations with Parliament dates back hundreds of years. Okay, so the monarch summons, opens, and prorogues, and even dissolves Parliament. These are the roles that the monarchy has. They also have significant authority over the electoral process, calling elections when they want. Well, we say this, however, the theoretical powers of the monarchy are a little bit different to the actual powers that are used by our current monarch. It also must be said that the monarch's power over the electoral process was hampered ever so slightly by the Fixed Term Parliament Act in 2011, which really sets elections to be every 5 years, so sets distinctions between elections, okay, rather than them being called whenever the monarchy pleases. The Prime Minister is legally obligated to go to the monarch and ask her to prorogue and dissolve Parliament to authorise a general election. The monarch will then, by royal proclamations via the Privy Council, authorise the prorogation and dissolving of Parliament, and authorise a general election by writ. The monarch grants royal assent to bills which have passed their parliamentary stages. A bill cannot be valid without royal assent. There is a binding convention which requires the monarch to grant royal assent. So this is not a piece of statute law. It's a general convention, and if you remember what we talked about when we looked at conventions in an earlier video, a convention is a general rule of thumb or practice which has its historical importance, and it's been used for hundreds of years to the point where it becomes almost legally binding. However, this idea that the monarchy has to grant royal assent to bills before the bills become legislation does beg the question: could a monarch refuse to give royal assent to certain bills, and thus involving themselves within the political and legal process, and in fact hampering the democratic process that Parliament is sovereign and representing the people? Okay, that's the interesting question. So there are a few different ways in which we could answer this question. With the passing of the Human Rights Act, for example, the monarch should not be compelled to do anything which violates their freedom of speech, conscience, or religion. That's a generally held idea that people have human rights, and people's rights to have freedom of speech, conscience, and religion, and this also applies to the monarchy. And this idea is discussed by Robert Blackburn in his The Royal Assent to Legislation and the Monarch's Fundamental Human Rights, and he attempts to answer really how you can get round this issue. So he suggested that two answers could be implemented. The first, the Human Rights Act ultimately relies on the Regency Acts of 1937 and 1953, and the second focuses on the idea of royal assent itself. The monarch could either declare that they are not available for the performance of their duties as head of state due to a fundamental, on the grounds of their human rights and their conscience, or they could rather define the royal assent as a narrow duty to certify that a bill has to be passed through all its necessary parliamentary stages. So there are really two routes that we can look at. There are actually technically two within the second one. So one could say that they are not able to perform their duties as part of their freedom of conscience, or they could just define the royal assent to be as more of a narrow duty. These are two ways in which one could look at the question about whether or not bills could be refused by the monarch. However, there's obviously a lot of debate still throughout on this question. When it comes to the monarchy and their relation with the judiciary, the constitutional status of the judiciary is underpinned by the origins of the Royal Prerogative. So this ultimately dates back to the medieval period, and it's the source of justice is derived from the monarch. The divine right of kings, the view that the monarch has their right to rule through God, and also their right to impose morality almost across their subjects. So today the monarchical duties in the judiciary are mainly carried out by the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. So in general, what we've done here is had a brief overview of looking at the monarch as the head of state, having a look at the idea that the monarch is the head of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, look at the constitutional role of the monarchy outlined in the Section 3 of the Coronation Oath Act, and then also had a look at the relationship between the monarchy and the three branches of government, being the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary.